So you want to drive a forklift. Today we're going to continue on part 2 of knowledge, where we will start with where we left off last time, communication. Last time we talked about communication, why it's important to get information about the type of hazards you might come across and keep yourself and others safe. Make sure you follow workplace policies and procedures and get information about task requirements. Now, we're going to talk about methods of communication. There's many different types of methods of communication we've got out there. We've got written instructions, we've got signage, we've got hand gestures, we've got listening and asking questions, or audio devices or sensors on your forklift. Ways we can get information across to other people, warning them of different messages like forklifts coming, the beeper, you need to stop, hand gestures, what do I need to do, listening and asking, signage. Preparing for work tasks and maintaining consultation. Why would you maintain communication in the workplace? Because the environment's constantly changing. New hazards could be in the way, other people could come in, new methods of traffic control or management could be put in place. You'd want to update your safe work procedures. SWAPs, safe work procedures. Safe work procedures tell you about the risks involved in doing certain work tasks, outline the controls that can be put in place to help you do the task safely. They're usually written as a set of basic steps for workers to follow. They're usually implemented before the job starts. You're working on a construction site, you're working in a factory, most likely in a factory, the SOPs or SWAPs will be put in place before the factory even opens. And they'll be constantly being adjusted, and that's why you'll need to maintain communication along the way. Weather conditions. Weather conditions can affect the performance of your forklift. Snow and ice, slippery ground, ice on the ground, you'd want to use chains on your forklift. You want to adapt your driving to the conditions of the environment. Strong wind can lay your forklift over. You put a load up in the air, you get a good gust of wind and your forklift is tipping over sideways. Lightning, electrocution, death, water on the operating surface. Most forklifts are designed to drive on dry surfaces, dry, flat, solid surfaces. You put a bit of water on the floor, it's like dropping grease for a forklift. They will slip and they will slide. You should not drive a forklift if the ground conditions are wet. You drive slowly if you have to drive. You drive carefully. You avoid ramps and slopes. Heat. Heat's something that we worry about here in Victoria, and probably the rest of Australia as well. If you go to Central Australia, heat could be an issue driving a forklift. You're sitting on top of an engine. That engine's producing heat. You've got sun beating down on your head. You've got a high risk of heat stroke, heat exhaustion, dehydration. So you want to make sure you're hydrated or avoid driving in the direct sunlight if you can. Poor visibility. Now, I'm not only talking about fog. I know some places in the world you probably get pea soups for fog. You look at England, the fog can be as thick as pea soup, can't see past the windscreen of your car. Or you can be talking about smoke, bushfires. I know in Australia a couple of years ago we had the bushfires go through. I know I was out there, my eyes were burning. I'm unable to see clearly. Before you start work, you want to make sure your risk control measures are put in place. You're working in a dark area, you have sufficient lighting so you can see clearly, so you can work safely. Pedestrian exclusion zones and vehicle exclusion zones are put in place. Keeping your forklift separate from other people, keeping your forklift separate from vehicles. Dangerous goods. You want to make sure they're isolated and stored correctly. Always check with your MSDS or SDS. Clear paths of travel. Explore your pathway. Make sure there's no obstacles in the way. Make sure there's no pedestrians. And if you do need to set up exclusion zones or barricades or signage, set them up at that stage. Communicate everything you've done to the supervisor, your team leader. Make sure you communicate everything you've done to any appropriate people within the area. Make sure all obstructions are removed. You do that also in checking your path is clear. Getting on and getting off your forklift. Every forklift worldwide is a left-hand drive. So you mount your forklift from the left-hand side of your forklift. Don't get on the right-hand side. Your controls are on the right-hand side of the forklift. It's like jumping into a car from the passenger side. No matter where you are in the world, you always get in from the driver's side to drive a car. 3 points of contact. 2 hands, 1 foot. Maintain control over your body weight. You won't slip, you won't end up hitting the forklift with your face, falling on the ground or jumping off, twisting an ankle, even landing on the ground, breaking a leg, or even worse. Never use the steering wheel as a lever point. The steering wheel moves, you can slip, you can end up hurting yourself. Never jump off the forklift. Always face the forklift when getting on and off. Always check that the footholds haven't got any slip hazards like water or grease or mud on the controls. Do not grab the steering wheel. Logbook. Every forklift must have a logbook attached to it to do your daily inspections. You want to make sure the logbook's the correct one for that particular forklift you're using. Your daily inspections have been carried out on the logbook. All reported defects have been repaired. The logbook is current and up to date. Scheduled maintenance and daily inspections have been carried out. You want your forklift to keep running safely. Pre-start checks. It's important to check your forklift is working properly and is safe to use. They're dangerous at the best of times. If you jump on the forklift, you've got a hydraulic leak, your steering's not working properly, your brakes are failing. You want to make sure these items are working properly before you can start your forklift job operations. It can lead to serious injury and death if you do not check your forklift. You lose the loss of brakes, you run through a group of people, you lose your steering wheel, you get thrown off the forklift, anything can happen. And if you find anything wrong with it at this stage, if you're not qualified to repair it, you haven't got the authority to repair it, do not repair it. You tag the machine out of service. You put a service tag on it. You remove the key. You report the problem to your supervisor and you write the problem in the logbook. Some pre-start checks you should do. I cover your pre-start checks in later videos. But these are some of the things you should check on your forklift. You check your data plate for the capacity of the forklift. Make sure your data plate's legible so you know what you're going to lift up. Out of service tags. Make sure there are no out of service tags on your forklift. Fluid levels or leaks underneath your machine. All the fluid levels are correct. There's no leaks underneath your machine. Any safety devices such as lights, beacons, flashing lights are all attached and not broken. Fork arms aren't worn down. The tips aren't bent. There's no cracks in the heels. There's no rust on the forks. Rust eating through. I'm not saying you left it out overnight, you get a bit of surface rust. That doesn't matter. That's not going to affect the integrity of your forks. But if the rust is bubbling the metal, then you've got an issue. You want to make sure that the locking pins for your forks are in good condition. They are locking the forks, so they're not going to slide while you're carrying a load. The mast assembly, you look for damages, you look for the hoses, you look at the chains, you look at the pulleys. You check the hoses are not leaking. You check the pulleys are not cracked and everything's running through the pulleys. Chains are greased up. You check the lift systems, the tilt cylinders, the lift cylinders, the side shift cylinders. You check again they're not leaking, there's no abrasions, they're not being bent. Now tyres, now 2 types of tyres you can have on your forklift. You can have pneumatic tyres, you can have solid rubber tyres. Similar checks you do on both. You make sure the tyres are not worn down to the wear limit line. You check the tyres are evenly worn. You check the tyres have no chunks missing on them. You check the tyres are securely fitted to your forklift. One more check, if they are pneumatic tyres, you want to check the air pressure on your tyres. Overhead guards, all guards on the forklift need to be checked to make sure they're doing their job. Your overhead guard, your load backrest, your foot guard. You want to make sure they're not bent, there's no broken wales, there's no rust going through it. If there's rust or in bad condition, they're not going to do their job properly. A load can still fall off, loads can fall on your head, can kill you, seriously injure you. Fluid levels, as we discussed earlier, make sure they're all topped up. You've got 5 fluids you need to check. You've got your engine oil, you've got transmission oil, you've got brake oil, you've got your hydraulic oils to check. You make sure your coolant is sufficient so your machine doesn't overheat. Battery, depending on the type of battery. Some forklifts have sealed batteries. If you have a sealed battery, you'll have an indicator on it. Generally the light is green, it's good to go. Otherwise, you check the water levels on your battery. You check the terminals are connected properly. There's no corrosion on your terminals. You check your battery securely fitted in the cradle. Check the logbook. Make sure it's the right logbook for the forklift. You check the seat and a seat belt. Seat belt, a couple of checks you'll do on it. You make sure it clips. You make sure it locks. Give it a jerk. You make sure it's not torn or any stitching missing on your seat belt. Mirrors are adjusted and cleaned. You check, you make sure you're familiar with all the controls. Check all your controls. Make sure they're working. There's no pins dislodged. There's no broken springs in the levers. They are fully functioning. Everything that clicks and clacks on your forklift, it's clicking and clacking like it should be. You check your gas bottle. Now, depending where you are in the world, some have compliance plates, some do not. I know in Victoria we don't have a compliance plate, but we do have a date code on the bottle. You check the date code on the bottle, you make sure it's within 10 years of the check date. You also make sure you've got gas for the job. You also make sure the gas bottle is securely fitted to the back of your forklift. No hoses are leaking, you can't smell anything. Wheels and tyres. As I said, there are 2 types of wheels you have on your forklift. You have pneumatic, you have solid rubber. On pneumatic tyres, same thing you check on solid rubber, except you need to check the air pressure. You check they're not worn down, evenly worn, no chunks missing, and they're securely fitted, and air pressure. You do solid rubber, the same thing. They're not worn down, no chunks missing, they're securely fitted, and they're evenly worn. Pretty much the same, except air pressure on pneumatic. Checking the data plate. You need to have a legible data plate on your forklift. Here in Australia or Victoria, even Australia-wide, if your data plate's not legible, you have an accident in your forklift, you get investigated by WorkSafe here in Australia, you'll be fined negligible. You're not allowed to drive a forklift without a data plate or an unreadable data plate. If you find your data plate's unreadable, your forklift's missing your data plate, you tag it out of service, you remove the key, you report the problem to your supervisor, and you write the problem in your logbook. Any problem or fault you find on your forklift, the same method you find, unless you're authorized to fix it and you have the knowledge to fix it, you will remove your key, tag your forklift out of service, report the problem to your supervisor, and write your problem in your logbook. As we explained in the beginning, what is a forklift? A forklift is an industrial truck used to lift and move loads. It has a mast and has an elevated load carriage with load holding parts. Now let's explain those load holding parts. There are many different types of attachments you can put on your forklift. The main attachment you can put on your forklift is forks. But forks may not necessarily be right for the job you're doing at the time. So there are different types of attachments you can put. You've got bail clamps, carpet spikes, drum lifters, carriers, jib attachments, paper roll clamps, personal work platforms, rotators, slippers, extensions, depending on the lingo you say in your country or in your state or in your company. Now some pictures of some of the attachments you can have. Personal work platform. You get in there, you can carry people. All you can do though with the personal work platform is lift people up and put them down again. You cannot travel with a person inside the guard cage. You've got a jib attachment, which converts your forklift into a mobile crane. We'll talk a bit more about the jib attachment later. You've got a carpet spike. You've got a drum attachment. Now, any attachment you put on your forklift needs to be engineeringly designed for that particular forklift. If it's not designed for that forklift, you cannot use that attachment. How do you know it's designed for that forklift? If your attachment is designed for that forklift, you can check your data plate. Why would you check your data plate? Because the rated capacity of your forklift will change. So you need to check the data plate to know what you can lift with that particular attachment on your forklift. More than likely, your capacity will be reduced. You're adding the weight of the attachment, you'll be changing your load center distance. Generally, your change of load center distance will become longer. So if your load distance is longer, you can carry less weight with the forklift. Different other attachments you can have. There's your bail clamp, you've got your rotators, you've got your paper roll clamps, and you've got your extensions, slippers. Using a jib attachment. Now, you've just converted your forklift into a mobile crane. Converting into a mobile crane, you're going to have a different effect on your forklift. As you take off, your load will start moving back and forth, or swing. Now, if your load's moving back and forth, you're going to have a variable load center distance. It will increase and decrease, increase and decrease. What effect will that have on your forklift? Well, it's going to make it unstable, your forklift. The capacity you can lift is going to vary. It's going to vary. There will be a reduced stability to your forklift. So you want to be traveling slow with a jib attachment, making sure you maintain that swing under control as you drive. We talked about pre-start checks. Things you check before you start the engine on a forklift. We are now going to talk about operational checks. Checks you do after you have started the forklift. The engine is running. You want to make sure the parts in your forklift are working properly. You know there are no leaks and there's no visible damage on your forklift. Now, you want to make sure the controls are working, your safety devices are working, your machine is working. So what would you check? Well, first of all, you get on your forklift, you fasten your seatbelt, you put your seatbelt on start your forklift correctly. It's running, you start to check your lights. Especially if it's a vehicle that travels on the road, your vehicle needs to be roadworthy. Everywhere in Australia, your vehicle needs to have a roadworthy certificate with it, if it is travelling on the road. So, just like your car, just like a truck that travels on the road, you want to make sure your lighting system's working. So you've got your headlights, turn them on, you've got your headlights on, you've got your tail lights, you've got indicator lights, you've got brake lights. You check they're all working. And it's easy to do. You have to sit inside the forklift and you can do all the checks within the driving seat. Now you've checked your lighting system, you want to make sure your warning devices are working. Being an industrial vehicle, you've got an extra warning device. Well, a couple of extra warning devices. You've got a flashing light up top. You want to make sure that's working. You put the truck in reverse gear with your foot on the brake. You listen to your beeper. Like every other car or vehicle on the road, you've got a reverse light that comes on. You've got a horn, like every other vehicle. You want to make sure that's working as well. You check your gauges, fuel gauge, temperature gauge, oil pressure gauge, depends. Some forklifts have got a ton of gauges there. Some forklifts can be very basic and simple. One of the most basic gauges you have is your temperature gauge and your AR gauge. Check the path around you. Make sure it's clear from hazards. For the next lot of checks you do, you don't want to be running into anything, you want to make sure you've got a clear path of travel. You want to check your steering. You check your steering while you're moving. You travel forwards and you travel in reverse. Check your steering at the same time, making sure it's turning correctly. You check your handbrake. You check your handbrake while stationary. Do not drive your forklift and plant your handbrake on. For sure, you're going to have an accident or do some damage to your forklift. Put your handbrake on, put your foot on the foot brake, put your truck in gear, and see if it moves. If it doesn't move, your handbrake's working. Repeat the same process in reverse. Check the forks are working on your forklift. The mast go all the way up, come down, tilt all the way forwards, tilt all the way backwards. Use your side shift, left and right. Reporting faults and recording faults. As I've said several times, if you're not authorised and you do not have the knowledge, do not repair the forklift. There's only one method you can do with 4 steps. Remove the key. Tag your machine out of service. Report the problem to your supervisor. Write the problem in the log. Communication. Communicating your hazard control measures that you have put in place. You communicate them to everyone. When you're sure all hazard and risk control measures are in place, you must communicate what has been done to other people in the work area that might be affected. And that could be anyone. It could be a visitor on site. It may be a truck driver coming in. Your colleagues, they need to know what you've set up. You communicate the information to them so they know what you're doing and to stay out of your way. Your truck driver comes in, he doesn't know your company policies and procedures, he doesn't know what control measures have been put in place, so you communicate those to him. He may have to hand his keys over so the truck doesn't move. He may have to stand in a certain location so he's not in the way of the forklift while you're unloading the truck. You communicate it to other people in the area so they know when you're moving that forklift around to stay out of that area so they do not get hit by the forklift. Performing work tasks. Before you lift a load up, you need to know the weight of the load. How would you find out the weight of a load? There are several ways you can find out the weight of a load. Checking the weighbridge note, delivery docket, consignment note. The truck drivers need to know what weight's on the back of their truck, so they have a consignment note or something in their possession to tell them how much each pallet weighs. You could weigh the load, put it on the scales and find out what the weight of the load is. Sometimes it'll be written on the box or the parcel itself. The weight will be there, you'll have the net weight, you'll have the tar weight, so you'll know the weight of the load. Or you can calculate the weight of the load. As you put it on, you know the weight of each box. Generally most boxes, if it's the same product, will all weigh the same. So you know how many boxes, calculate how many rows by the height, and add the pallet in. You can use a common table of weights. Now the common table of weights are accurate to a certain degree, but not always accurate. If it's coming to timber, if it's coming to soil, a common table of weights generally does not help you out. Timber could be freshly cut, it could be old timber. Freshly cut, it's got a lot of oil in it, it's still very fresh, and it will weigh more than something that's 10 years old and dried right out. Operating safely. Whenever you operate your forklift, you need to operate it safely. 3 points of contact: get on and off your forklift. Always wear your seatbelt. Start your forklift according to procedures in the company policies and procedures. Lift your forklifts off the ground. Never carry your load higher than axle height of the forklift. Closest to the ground is safest. The higher you go, the more you're going to destabilize your forklift. Always check your path is clear before moving. If you cannot see for whatever reason, ask someone to guide you or travel in reverse. And if you can, restack the load so you can see clearly past the load. Whenever you go around corners, use your horn. Let people know that you're traveling around the corner. You're passing another forklift or you're passing other people, use your horn. Let them know. They may not be aware that you're there. They could be wearing earmuffs and not hearing what's going on in the area. Your forklift could become white noise mixed with the other forklifts in the area. They may not hear you. Hit your horn. Let them know that you're coming. Whenever you travel up or down a ramp, never face downwards. Never. Your forklift and load must be facing uphill when you travel down or up. You need to support that load. If you stop in a hurry and you're going downhill, your load's just going to slide off your forklift. Never turn a forklift on a ramp or a slope. This is dangerous. You've got a high point of balance on a forklift, your forklift could tip over. Also, you could lose the load. The load could slide off the pallet. Always travel straight up and down a ramp facing uphill. Driving on a wet and slippery surface. As I said earlier, your forklifts aren't designed to travel on a wet ground. They're designed to travel on a solid, level surface, hard concrete, dry. If there's water on the ground, you travel slowly, you travel carefully, you avoid ramps and slopes, including dock edges. Never let anyone ride on the forklift. There are some forklifts that allow you to carry people. Those forklifts will be fitted with a passenger seat and a passenger seat belt. That's the only time a person can ride on a forklift. You will not find them on the standard average weight forklift. You may find those seats on a shipping container forklift. Whenever you're unloading a truck off a dock, you use a secure dock plate or a secure bridge plate to cover the gap between the truck and the loading dock. Only pick up loads within the capacity of your forklift. If you have a load that isn't packed correctly, repack it so it's safe and secure. Never pick a load up on one forklift arm. Your forklift's not designed to lift a load on one fork arm. They're designed to lift up whatever the rating is on 2 forks. You put all that weight on the one forklift arm, you are going to break it. You're going to damage it. You'll bend it. Your forklift will be out of balance. Your load's going to be off balance. You can end up dropping the load. You can end up damaging the forklift. Never raise or lower loads near or over people. If the load falls off, generally you've got a 5 kilo load falling 5 meters, and that hits someone, you're going to do some serious injury. You could even kill the person. Always keep your side shift in the middle when traveling. You travel with the side shift over to one side or over to the other side, again, your forklift is going to be unbalanced. If you take a corner a little bit too fast, it's going to lean, it's going to tip. Whenever you're stacking pallets on top of one another, there are 3 basic steps you've got to take. The first step is to check the ground. Is it solid? Is it level? The second step you take, find out which is your heaviest pallet. Place the heaviest pallet on the bottom. The third step is never stack it too high. Make sure it is stable to stack. If it's not stable, over time that pallet will collapse, will end up on the ground. Now there are many causes of forwards tipping. We're only going to cover some of them here. Okay, forwards tipping can be caused by overloading your forklift, braking hard, incorrect use of mast tilt, travelling the wrong way down a slope or a ramp, travelling the load raised, hitting any overhead obstructions, the load's not balanced properly on your forklift, the load centre is too far forward, or the load's not pushed against the heel of the forks. Sideways tipping, driving too fast while turning, turning on a ramp or a slope, driving with an underinflated tyre, turning with the load raised in the air, driving with the side shift moved to one side, driving with an unbalanced load. There are many more reasons why your forklift can tip over forwards or backwards. We've just covered some of the most common reasons why you end up tipping your forklift. Unplanned and unsafe situations. As I said earlier, you need to be alert while driving the forklift. Anything can happen at any time. People could walk out in front of you. Your brakes could fail. Your load could fall off your forks because of the vibration of your forklifts. You could pick up a load that's not stacked properly. In the event of a brake failure, how would you stop your forklift? There are several ways you can stop your forklift in case of a brake failure. You could use the load itself, lower it to the ground and use the momentum of the load to slow you down, the weight of the load. You can pump the brakes, see if they come back again. You can use your reverse gear. Most forklifts will take the punishment in reverse gear. Ultimately, if none of that works, you would use your handbrake to stop the forklift. But remember, alert other people that you're out of control. Same if you lose your steering wheel. You're driving and your steering disappears. What would you do? Well, stop your forklift immediately. Now remember, after each of these issues, after anything you find that could go wrong with your forklift, and it does, the same procedure. Remove your key, tag the machine out of service so everyone knows the forklift is damaged. Report the problem to your supervisor so the forklift will get repaired as soon as possible. Write the problem in the logbook so you can track that problem. What would you do if your forklift hits power lines? There is a procedure, providing you haven't been injured or worse, killed, while you attempt to break connection of the power lines. If you can't break connection, the forks could have been welded on, you stay on the forklift. You don't touch any metal parts of the forklift. If you can't stay on the forklift, look around you. Make sure there's no water or oil on the ground. Jump clear from the forklift. Don't touch the forklift and the ground at the same time. Hop, shuffle at least 8 meters away. Warn others to stay at least 8 meters away. Once the power has been switched off and the situation is under control, report the situation to your supervisor and make sure the forklift gets checked by a competent mechanic before you use it again. What do you do if the forklift is tipping over? Above all, above anything you do, you stay in the forklift. You brace yourself. You lean the opposite way the forklift is tipping. You wait till the forklift lands or stops falling. Then climb out. Never jump from a tipping forklift. You have a high risk of ending up underneath the forklift and being crushed. There's not too many people I know that have survived 4.5 tons landing on top of them. Stay in the machine. If there is an emergency on your work site, you need to tell people about the emergency. Who would you tell? Well, you tell your people of authority, your manager, your supervisor, your team leader, OH&S representative, if you've got one, other workers, there could be visitors on site. They all need to know there's an emergency. And you need to contact emergency services. There are things you should tell them. You need to tell people that there is an emergency. You need to tell people where it's not safe to go, and you need to tell people what the emergency is. Shutting down, packing up for the day. So you've finished using your forklift and it's time to go home. Well, there are places that you should and should not park your forklift. You don't want to just park it in the middle of the road, jump off and go home. You wouldn't park your forklift in front of emergency exits. You wouldn't park in front of doorways. You wouldn't park on ramps or slopes. You wouldn't park in front of firefighting equipment. Pathways, walkways, first aid stations, anywhere your forklift can block pedestrians or people. Shutting down. Although I have covered shut down in a later video, there is a basic procedure in shutting down your forklift. You want to park your forklift in a safe location first. Next, you lower your forks to the ground. You want to minimize any trip hazards. You put your truck in neutral. You put your handbrake on so your forklift doesn't roll away, and remove the key and dismount your forklift. Why do you remove your key? To stop any unauthorized use of the forklift. Make sure you turn your gas off or charge your forklift, depending on what you're using, if you're using electric or if you're using a combustion engine. Update your logbook, and if your worksite has any procedures, follow your worksite procedures. Securing your forklift, always turn it off and remove your key. Securing your forklift in this way will prevent any unauthorised people from using it and may prevent it even being stolen. I'm sure everywhere in the world you have break-ins into factories. Someone breaks in and sees a forklift with a key in it. What do you think is going to go through their mind? Especially if they're young kids breaking in, 13, 15, 17-year-olds, they're going to want to drive that forklift. Thank you for watching.